You have a number for us, Junie?
Yes, sir.
We're going to sing number 316.
No, 362.
Oh, 362. I thought you said 316.
No,
362. 362. Just short, 3 days short of a year. And Brother Dove, if you don't mind, we'll ask you to lead prayer after this song. Thank you, Mike.
Dear Father in heaven, as we gather together tonight to study from your word, we want to first thank you for all the rich blessings that you have given us, especially the blessing that you have given through your Son, Jesus our Savior, that we might be called your children. We might be part of your family, Father. And Father, as we think about that, help us to truly be thankful. Father, thank you for the blessings of life that you give us each day. Help us to be grateful. Help us to reflect that in the way we live. We pray our lives in this world, Father, and we reflect your love and your mercy for those around us. Father, guide us tonight as we study. Give us the wisdom to use the things that we learn here. Give us the strength and the courage to put them to practice in our lives. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, we're beginning a study tonight in the parables of Jesus. And we're going to start, hopefully you've all got the schedule. I didn't realize there was an error there until it was printed, and then I didn't want to reprint it. So since didn't get them handed out anyway, it doesn't matter. So you didn't waste a lot of time studying next week's lesson, which wouldn't be a waste, would it? Still be good. But tonight we're going to start with Matthew chapter 13 and go 1 through 23. Well, I guess they're actually right, come think of it, once I look at it again. Get my eyeballs on, my glasses on. This is the parable of the sower. What does parable mean? What do we mean when we say parable? It's an illustration? Okay, good. Anything else?
Story with a heavenly meaning.
Okay. Earthly story with a heavenly meaning. All right. What else? Earthly story with a heavenly meaning, I guess. I don't know if it fit in that category or not, but it's not necessarily a true story, but it is something that could happen. Think of the word parable. What does it sound like? Parallel. Yeah, it's a parallel. So what the story is, it's something that we know and understand. And we lay it down, and then we make the spiritual application beside it, running parallel to that. So that's what a parable is. It's a story that's parable to real life, and it's also a parable to the spiritual meaning that we're looking to understand. This particular story is about what? A sower. What's another word we'd use for him in today's vernacular? Planter. All right, good. What else? Farmer. Yeah, and the odds are, chances are, I don't know, don't want to make it too concrete, but it wouldn't surprise me, I'll put it that way. It wouldn't surprise me if while this story, Jesus was using this story, that over here behind Jesus, where they could see, there might have been a man over there sowing seed. And you think about that in many of the parables that Jesus tells, there's always that possibility that it's in front of them. So when he talks about a sower goes forth to sow, they may have all been looking at this farmer who's out there sowing his seed. So Jesus used real life events and real life situations to teach spiritual things. Now, we've mentioned several times that we have been told that we cannot think beyond our vocabulary or beyond our visual experience. If I haven't heard it or seen it, I can't understand it. And therefore, when Jesus is talking about heaven, he frequently says, heaven is like this, or hell is like this. And of course, our tendency is to take it absolutely literal. And there are people who would argue that in heaven there are going to be streets made out of gold. Frankly, I don't know if there's going to be streets there or not. Yeah, who cares? Doesn't matter to me, but Jesus had a message he was trying to get across to the people. Here he's talking about a sower. It is said that parables typically have one central meaning. And you've heard me say this before. The problem is preachers need how many points for a sermon? I preached one last Sunday that only had two. You may have not noticed. But anyway, so we have a tendency to break parables down where there's more than one lesson. And sometimes it's hard to see what that one lesson is. And maybe, I'm not saying there aren't other lessons in between. I'm just talking about, that's what the scholars say. They say that generally there's one point to a parable. And I'm not going to argue with them one way or the other. But we have here a parable of the sower, and it is full of things to preach about. So preachers typically like the parable of the sower. Without necessarily reading it, though I know some of you have already, someone tell us very briefly and quickly the parable of the sower. I'm not asking you to quote it.
Good soil,
Good soil?
bad soil.
Bad soil? All right. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Where the seed lands.
Where the seed lands, what kind of soil it lands on. All right. And what else?
Talks about the weeds also.
And the weeds. Okay.
Well, the sower was not focusing on where the seed landed. Most of us would think, seed costs a lot of money, it's precious, we need to get it in the
Yeah.
landed. I'm wondering, he would have known if he had experience that when you throw that seed out there, if it hits hard ground that has no benefit, it's not gonna grow, but that was not factored to him. He just flung it.
When we talk about this parable, we frequently focus on the types of soil. And we say, you know, it's a parable about the soils. But is it?
Well, it's a parable about the sower too.
It's about, yeah, it seems like it's more a parable about the sower than it is about the soils. Now, there's lessons there on both sides, but what's the impact he's trying to get across here to us?
Well, I think one of the good words is indiscriminate. We are the souls of the Lord.
Okay.
And when we are deciding who that we want to spend our time with, because our time is limited, we try to look for people that we think are good
Mm-hmm.
qualities, but sometimes we think it's not necessarily good.
We consider someone a good prospect based on our concept. The first church I ever worked with, fresh out of college, they handed me a stack of index cards. You know, that it had to be 150 names, and had the name and the address, and every one of them, every card had written on there, good prospect. None of those people had ever been to church. They'd never come to a Bible study. They'd never had a Bible study in their home. It was just the members sat down and thought, well, now who can we give him some names to chase down? And when I approached those people, it would have been like, who are you and why are you here? It'd been like a cold call salesman trying to sell them something. And I've done that too. But, yeah, and I went on a campaign one time with Brother Ivan Stewart into Baltimore. And I think it was the second day, Brother Ivan got up and said, I understand. You got to understand, this is back in the 70s. Inflation hadn't kicked in as bad as it is now. And he got up and he said, I understand that some of you are in neighborhoods where the houses are worth $30,000 or more. And I looked across the table at someone that is sitting at the table with me, and I said, I'm knocking doors in a neighborhood where the servants' quarters are $30,000. We never studied with a homeowner. We studied with a lot of servants, because guess who sent us to that part of town? The local church said, knock doors over here in Towson because we'd like to.
They wanted you to knock doors where the people had money.
Yeah, and the bank president, the mayor, whoever lived there, that's who they wanted us to reach. And I'm not opposed to that. They need the gospel too. But we weren't near as successful as they, doing what we hoped. So the question here is, are we talking just about the soil and the heart, or are we not also talking about the sower and what the sower does? Yeah, I think it's as much about the sower as it is anything else. And what does the sower do with this seed? You mentioned it already. Yeah. They just throw it. Now, I've done some of that. My daddy loved his yard, and so he would always seed every fall, and so we'd go out in the yard and grab a handful of seed and throw it. Handful of seed and throw it. Wasn't any of this cultivator stuff where it goes right down the row and, we drop one seed every 6 inches. I mean, we're covering that ground. This sower, this farmer, is throwing that seed out, and he knows the more seed he plants, the bigger crops he's going to have. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but he's not stupid. So I would suspicion the seed that fell on the bad soils, that fell there because he was trying to get as much of the good soil covered as possible. I don't think he walked up to a pathway where he knew nothing was going to grow and just started throwing down handfuls of seed. No, the seed that landed on the pathways was a seed where he was trying to get right up here to the edge of this good soil. And some of it fell over in the bad seed, in the path here. But nevertheless, it got the seed, and as was pointed out, he didn't go pick it up or sweep it back or rake it back. He left it there.
The seed is expensive, so they didn't want to waste it.
Well, true, but what they did is they saved seed from last year's crop. They didn't do like our farmers do today.
They didn't go out and buy the seed.
No. Today, most of the crops, they're hybrid, and they don't, if you grow a crop of hybrid seeds, it's not reseedable. You have to, am I saying that right? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but these guys, in biblical times, they saved seed from last year's crop, and it would grow. So it didn't have the same cost. Yes, it had value, but it didn't have the same cost that farmers today would have to undertake. Yes, sir.
I think you're worrying a little bit about farming that you have to picture what Jesus did. He was looking at the typical average farmer who was seeding a field for grain.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, when you're seeding wheat or oats or something like that, you don't go out there with a planter that sticks it in the road. You dig up the soil and you throw your seed everywhere on your property
Mm-hmm.
that has a possibility to grow. And his message here is going to be tough. So it's going to be 12 men around them that are going to be teaching. And what he's saying is go out, teach. Spread it to everybody that can hear it.
You come in contact with, yeah.
Don't be discouraged because some of it's going to be like this guy that's sowing barley out there.
Yeah.
He's going to sow his seed out. Some of it's going to fall on the path. Some of it's going to fall on rocks. Some of the areas he hasn't got all the weeds out yet. But he's going to, where the good ground is, it's going to come up. And where there's questionable ground, it may come. But sometimes when seeds fall on the rocks, you'll get a couple of stalks that come. Sometimes the weeds won't kill out that, some hardy bark. So he's saying, you're about to go on the sowing expedition. You're going to see the word of God to the world.
Absolutely.
And you're going to get different responses.
And when you said to the world, that's beyond what they would have been thinking about at that time. Jesus has included the Gentiles in that, as we know, but they didn't. All right, good. Over here.
In the sense of the sower, though, me and my son went through a lot of evangelist training, and there was a lot of like tips and stuff that they tell you, stuff like that. And there was just like an initial way by how they answer questions and what they say and what they're willing to do, if they're willing to come to Bible study or not. You would do that, but sorry, there was the point of that was, we can only reach so many people. We only have a limited amount of time we can reach so many people. If you are sowing a seed and, someone is defiant, you don't want to waste your time chasing them down when you have 3 people that are willing to come to Bible study that next week.
Mm-hmm.
You use the best resources that you have to reach the most fertile soil, because then there's more people that you can hit up.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's not worth sowing to everybody. It's just a tool so that you can make more use of the seed.
Yeah, and we recognize that as too, but the word indiscriminate was used a minute ago. And again, the idea is in Jesus' parable, the gospel goes to all. Now, all do not accept it, all do not become believers, all do not become Christians, but they're at least given the opportunity. Now, obviously, in our work, sometimes we have a choice to make, and we choose between who's being more receptive at the time. But that's after we've gotten into it. In the beginning, it's open to everybody. It's for and those who respond are the ones that we then can respond back to as well. When Jesus is talking here, in my mind, yes, he is talking about the different kind of souls, and I want to talk about those in just a minute. But in my mind, what Jesus is saying that applies to me today and to us today is, don't you prejudge who's going to be saved. Because we have a tendency to do that. And then what's also irritating is the ones who are converted out of the pits of hell become the best in proclaiming the message, either individually or publicly, because they got a story to tell. I mean, you know, I was in drugs, I was in alcohol, I was in sex slavery, I was in this, I was in that, and I was robbing banks and stealing from, and I come out of that, and Jesus saves me. And we get all excited about, yeah, so let's go talk to somebody. And do we want to go? Would we go and talk to that guy? You know, would we go out on the street corner? No, we want to, that's just our nature. Not picking on you, I'm just saying that's just human nature. You're different, of course, you're better. But the rest of the folks, they're going to go for the guy who looks clean, his clothes are pressed, his hair's combed, and his breath doesn't smell bad. And yeah, that's who we want to come to church.
Somebody we want to associate.
Yeah, somebody we want to associate with. And the gospel is for all, because that the seed that goes out there represents what? Yeah, it represents the Word of God, the gospel, the message. And it's not modern day farming. It goes out there for everybody. We sometimes, I don't go off on that.
I know we're talking about the farmer here, but does the farmer that owns the land, does he hire out people to toss out the seed, or is it his, if it's his land, does he go out and do the thing and cultivate it?
Well, obviously it would depend. If it's a farmer with an acre, he's probably doing it himself. If he's got a bunch of acres, he's probably hiring somebody.
The reason I'm asking is because we are the sowers, and our job is to spread the word.
Yeah.
Teach them, that's it, that's our job, we've done our job, the rest is up to them. God will decide, they decide whether they come to God or not. So, if we threw out the word, whether it comes up or not,
Yeah, here's where we can take the parable too far in our human thinking. For instance, does a sower sowed in somebody else's field? You know, no, that's not the message. The message is not about stay in your field. The message is about be a sower who shares the word. Anyone else? Comments? Let's talk about the soils, the dirt. What's the first one? And you got to get over into the second half, or about 10 verses down. Where is it? Where he starts telling them what it means.
some seed fell by the road. What do the birds do? Come and pick it up. and eat it.
Okay. Why do the birds eat the seeds? Yeah, it's food. Okay, I walked into that. Why do they eat those particular seeds?
Because they're uncovered.
They're easy to get to, they're uncovered.
In this parable, the devil doesn't want to take root.
It's not accepted. It's just laying there. So the birds eating the seed isn't necessarily the bad thing. The bad thing is what? The soil didn't take it. The soil didn't accept it. So when the devil snatches it away, what's that illustration of? Illustrative of? Yeah, and the devil gets it out of them so they don't have a chance to take a second look at it. And you know people like that. And, you know, sometimes we study with people, and I'm not saying this happens often, but we study with people and they're not receptive, and all of a sudden, some months later, they show up at church or they call you on the phone. And you're thinking, what's going on here? Ah, they had a second chance. The devil didn't snatch the word out of their heart. Again, we're talking about parables, we're talking about application. What's the next kind of soil that's mentioned? Rocky soil. Now, what does rocky soil mean? The opposite of, what does it not have? Yeah, it's not enough dirt there. Yeah, kind of crunchy. There's not enough soil there to, you know, give it some nourishment. So, but the birds can't quite get to it, so it's there. That is? All right, so the rocky soil, again, the problem with the rocky soil is they have not taken root, and they are not, you know, not going to produce a crop, a grain. All right, the result? Nothing?
It says when the sun came up, plants were scorched. And they withered away because they had no root. And they germinated. It sounds like they germinated,
Yeah.
at least partially.
And when it says when the plants come up, it doesn't mean it made a big stalk. Can I tell about your situation? Teresa has been trying to root a ficus plant for like 10 times. What? Fiddle leaf fig. And the roots will come out occasionally on 1 or 3 or something like that, and then all of a sudden they just dry up. So this is probably, when it says when the plants came forth, we're not talking about a big stalk that's about to produce grain. We're likely talking about what we might call a yearling or a beginning. Their faith's just beginning. And you can actually see their faith. You know, you can see they're struggling with some issues and got things in their life. And then all of a sudden, they're gone.
He didn't really anything to me, but
All right, so we've got the road soil, we've got the Rocky Ridge Road soil. What else? What's the next soil? Thorns and weeds. And what does that represent? He tells you.
Those plants are sucking up any nutrient that might be in the soil and using that so that the seeds and the plants can't have the nutrients they need.
And what do those things represent? Those thorns and weeds, what do they represent? Problems in your life. It may be sin. It may not be sin. Have you known of people who turned their back on the Lord because they were too busy with something else? And what they were busy with wasn't bad. It wasn't a sin. Yeah. I know a family that basically lost themselves and their children because of PTA. I mean, they were like the state champions for the Parent and Teachers Association. They were really gung-ho into that. I know of other people who basically had their Christian faith choked out because of their employment. And others for other reasons. And we could probably name several here if we, kind of went through the room and asked everybody what have you seen happen to people. And yeah, so it can be just plain old sin, or it can just be life. Things that we make sin. I'm sorry, do we have someone in the parking lot prowling around?
They got back in their vehicle and then they stepped there. It looked like a electric school.
There's an English second language class going on.
English class there, they get out at 7:30, I think. So that may be what you saw.
Oh, they could be waiting to pick up whoever's in the class. I'm not sure either. All right. We got the path, we got the rocky, we got the thorns. What's next? What's the good soil? People who've been receptive, their mind has been open, they hear the message, their hearts respond to it. Now, about this time we want to say, yeah, that's me. You know, I'm the good soil. Okay, I grant you that. But again, is that the message at this point? I'll come back to the sower and the fact that the sower, in our vernacular, in our setting, smiles at everyone, says, God bless you, you know, invites people to church. I mean, that's the whole point of our being, you know, reaching out to the community and trying to draw them into the family of God. So, what happens if the good soil doesn't get the seed? Yeah, they're no better off than the rocky soil or the path or the weed. You know, they have to have the seed in order for anything to happen. And in order for them to get the seed, there has to be a sower. There has to be someone there who's going to share with them the message of Jesus Christ. And if there's no sower sowing the seed, then there's not going to be any harvest. Now, as I said a while ago, I suspicion that the sower probably was more generous throwing his soil or his seed out in what he knew to be the good soil. And when he got close to the rocky path or the rocks or the weedy soil, he likely tried to restrain himself and not throw as much waste seed over here on this stuff he knew wasn't going to germinate, but nevertheless, he still allowed the seed to go over there. He didn't stop it from going over there.
Here's an interesting thought to me. If you've ever tried to grow a big garden, which I have, once you scatter that seed and all like that, you're not done. Because things are going to continue to happen. You've got to get in there and keep working on it. Some weeds are going to come up. You better get in there and grow. And keep working with that soil. So, you know, the sower, yeah. Us scattering the seed, that's not for all there is to it.
Yeah.
We've got to continue with those people. Befriend them.
And soil has to be prepared. You know, you go out and you scratch it around a little bit, you plow it, depending on what the crop you're trying to grow, but you have to prepare the soil. Now, if we take that and apply it to our specifics about our life and what we do in relating to people. All right, over here. That's all good soil. That means there's a bunch of good people over there. How do we prepare that soil? How do we plow it? Okay. This wasn't told by one of our preachers, but it was told by someone else that some lady moved into town, had come to church a couple, 3 times, and then Sunday she showed up and she was so excited. She told her preacher, says, "Oh, preacher, I'm so excited. We have bought us a house, and the person on either side of us is a member of this church, and the person across the street is a member of the church." And the preacher said, "Well, that's too bad. Who are you going to invite to church? You know, how are you going to be a witness and let your light shine?" Of course, now we lock ourselves up because of air conditioning and television, but nevertheless, we still have the same responsibility to prepare the soil. And sometimes it takes an intentional effort on our part to go out and basically, if not make a friend, at least make an acquaintance You know how much easier it is to invite someone who's an acquaintance and get a good reception than it is just to invite a perfect stranger. Now, it's easier to invite a perfect stranger. Why? Yeah, we don't worry about the rejection. We don't know them anyway, don't like them anyhow. But you go to someone that lives next door to you, or you meet on a regular basis at a certain function you attend to, and you invite them, then, and they say no, well, that kind of stings a little bit. So what we have to do is not let our feelings and emotions get in the way, and just be loving no matter what they say. If they say yes, great. If they say no, great, next time. In sales, I tell you, you need 100 no's before you can say you've tried. So we need to get out there and get some no's. Yeah, in a sense of our effort, we need to be able to continue to try. All right, anyone else? All right, what else is there?
We talked about it, sounds like some people will be the one that brings 10 people to the Jesus. Some people will bring 20, some people will bring 30, right? You never know. That's the good soul that brings out the.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if it's our human nature or what it is, but we have preconceived ideas. And if we have an attendance drive and we ask everybody to bring one person, bring a friend to Sunday school next week, and somebody brings 5 and somebody brings 1, now do we think less of the one who only brought 1 person? We shouldn't. They may have invited 20 and got 1. And the other guy may have invited 1 and they said, yeah, and I'll bring my cousins too. And so we can give too much credit or too much debit to what we think is the one who's successful. But the point is we all try. And the next time situations may be reversed. The person who brought 1 may end up with 10, and the one who brought 5 may end up with 0. You just don't know. But the good soil will have a variety, let's say, of response. Some will bring forth, how much?
160 or 30.
Now, we're talking about bushels of barley here. Brother Mike mentioned barley. That's likely what the grain was. And if you had a field that would produce 100 and another field that would produce 30 an acre, where would you want to make sure you sowed first? Now, you want to make sure you sow where you always get 100 for whatever reason. The soil's better, it gets better water. I don't know why, but I get 3 times as much out of this field as I do this field over here. But does that mean you don't sow in the field where there's 30? Of course not. Because that's still a good harvest.
We had a saying in Emily, don't invite the needy, invite the greedy.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing. Yeah,
But still, we want to invite the people that are greedy for the word.
yeah. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. There you go. Anyone else?
Bottom line is, don't prejudge anybody. Just do it.
And I feel like this is really the main message. The Great Commission says go into, not part, or not just your section, but go into all the world. And that was a command given to the apostles, and we know they did that. For the most part, they left their homeland and they scattered out. We don't know where they all went. We know the most about Paul because he wrote books that were preserved. The others may have written books that weren't preserved. I don't know. Maybe Andrew wrote the Gospel of Andrew somewhere, and it just didn't get copied and passed around. We don't know. But we know more about Paul and his contact in the Mediterranean world dealing with the Gentiles. But there's, I don't know whether to call it tradition or evidence or whatever, that the gospel was taken into India and other places in the East, and Paul wrote the gospel's been taken to the world. So the point again, I think, here with the sower is that our individual responsibility is to continue the Great Commission. Great Commission hasn't even happened at this point, but the message is still, you take the message and share it. Don't hoard it. Don't keep it. What if there's a farmer or sower that says, well, I'm not going to throw my seed out there and let it be eaten up by the birds or choked out by the weeds, so I'm just not going to sow it. I'm going to hang it here in my barn and keep it. Okay, he can do that. But what kind of crops is he going to get? Yeah, nothing. So because we understand our effort, our purpose is to share the message and not be discouraged when certain parts of the community do not respond as we had hoped they would respond. Now, the campaign I mentioned a moment ago was actually very successful because from that day on, we spent the bulk, about 3/4 or 2/3 of the rest of the campaign going into different neighborhoods and having much more success in reaching people. Now, we still had some success in that first neighborhood, but it just wasn't the same thing. So, how do we apply that now to ourselves in this modern day? Okay. We have to be the Word so people will see it living in us, and then we have to know the Word to be able to answer their questions when they ask, why are you different? And they may not ask it just like that, but in effect, they see how you live and what you do. Brother Hal's going to be teaching a class on Sunday morning, beginning Sunday morning, and I think he's going to be giving us another way. This is material that he's prepared, and I think it's going to be something that we'll all be able to get a better handle on. And maybe we can answer some questions that people might have. You know, in the stuff that I read and it comes through my desk, computer, whatever, we're getting, first of all, and have been for some years, the fact that the younger generation is rejecting God, rejecting church, rejecting religion. And now, in the last several months, I've been getting information from other people's studies and opinions that, hey, the youth, the young people of the world are beginning to look to God. They're beginning to look to Jesus. They're more open now to the message. So don't give up. You know, let's don't quit. We still need to be sowing the seed. And it doesn't matter what generation it is. It doesn't matter what century it is. It doesn't matter what culture it is. How would you like to be in Ukraine now or trying to share the gospel? How would you like to be in Africa or China or India teaching people the gospel? And you think, wow, that'd be hard. Well, it might be and it might not be. There's always someone who's receptive and open to hearing the gospel message. And that's something I think we need to take to heart and live by and function by. All right, anyone else?
There's a guy, I don't know if you've seen him on Facebook, Charles. I guess he's going to, I'm assuming that he's going to some college campuses. And he invites debates. And some of the college kids ask him certain questions, and he answers them. And some of them, well, why should I believe in God? He's good. I don't know if you've seen him on Facebook, but we're going to start sharing that so you guys can see it.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 guys that are doing that. They are basically what we'd call apologist. Apology meaning defense of the gospel, and so they're defending the gospel. And there's 2 or 3 of them that are pretty good. They get some national coverage. Actually, Ben Shapiro, who is a Jew, does a pretty good job on the existence of God and why we should be religious. But I guess him being Jewish is one of the things that I think I like. But there are people that are still looking for something better than this world, better than this life. And it's hard for them to understand how if this could be everything. They're out there. We just need to be willing to look for them. It's kind of like an Easter egg hunt if we were going to have another parable. You know, there's people out there. There's good soil out there, and we need to share that message.
The bottom line is that we are all God's creation, and we need to care about God's creation.
Yeah.
Care about one another, then, you know, if you care, you'll do the effort to improve.
We have to care for ourselves in relationship with Jesus, and we have to care for those other people out there in their relationship with Jesus. Yes.
And if the sower didn't put all this seed out, nobody would eat. The
Right.
sower or the other.
If he hangs that sack of seed in the barn and doesn't sow it, nobody benefits. Well, there's an old story. I don't know when I first read it, years ago, decades ago, where someone said, the worst thing on Judgment Day, or something to this effect, is if someone looks at you and you recognize them from your life on earth, and they say to you, why didn't you tell me? Yeah. So if we have people that we know, people we love, people we respect, and we don't tell them about Jesus, how do we expect them to know? And sometimes, I started to say this a while ago, and I'm going to tell it anyway. I was with a small congregation, and we were talking about sending a mailer out to our community. And this one elder said he would prepare the mailer. It was going to be a postcard. And he did prepare the mailer and mailed it. And he had so much information on that card, and the print was so small that you had to get a magnifying glass to read it. And yet his response was, but now we're free from the guilt of all men because we have sent them the gospel. I don't know what you do about junk mail, but we go through the mail standing by the trash can. You know, about 3/4 of it we don't even open. I tend to open more advertising because I'm looking for ideas, but that doesn't mean I read it. And you send somebody a postcard that's got 40 scriptures on it, you know. But the quote he said was from Scripture, and that we're now free from the guilt of all men. Why? Because you sent them a bunch of scriptures on a postcard? You know, no. You haven't cultivated the soil. You haven't sown the seed. You have alleviated your guilt, and that's all.
To do something that you know isn't going to work is the same as doing nothing.
That sounds profound.
Just make that up, Ted? The World Bible Study School was pretty good, so we were part of that.
Yeah.
You would always get responses from the students. You grade their things once they send them another lesson.
Yeah. You know, I guess the real thing I want to keep coming back to is doing it. The sower did it. We can talk about methods and whether you want to use Tizzles, Joule, or OBS, whatever, Fishers of Men, but doing it. Along the line of what Chuck just said, someone made the comment one time, well, I like my way of doing it better than I like his way of not doing it. So somebody going to criticize you for what you're doing and they're not doing anything, that's okay. You do it anyway. Maybe they could be more effective inviting your friends to church or inviting them to a Bible study. But guess what? They're not doing it. They're probably not even inviting their own friends. So you do it.
By the way, that he was in our book, it's number 799, and his title, you never mentioned him to me.
You never mentioned him to me.
Learn that song.
7,
799. Number?
yes,
Number? 799.
799. I thought you were saying 7999. I knew we didn't have that many songs. All right. Say again?
This may be a little off topic, but it still relates. So what do you think is actually the seed out there? Because I've brought like 4 or 5 people to church and I see them come that one time,
Mm-hmm.
but then I never see them again and I never hear from them again. And well, I threw the seed out there, but I don't know how to water it or take care of it or do any of it.
Yeah, and that happens. One of the big things about anybody bringing a guest or somebody just walking in off the street is how do we connect to them, and how do we get them to come back? And you know, there are things that need to be done. Anybody have any suggestions and thoughts about how we can help retain visitors that come here?
You don't want to be a pushy person because that pushes people away.
Okay.
But meet them. So many times that they're not even met and greeted.
Okay.
Meet them, try to find out if they have any issues like you do. Because we talk to them.
Yeah. And if someone else brings a guest, it's my responsibility to go meet them, and yours too. You know, welcome them.
One of our Christian sisters here that recently moved to San Antonio just now has visited a congregation there for the first time. She notified me on Sunday morning and said, I hope I'm not interrupting your Bible class, but I wanted to let you know I'm immediately linked her in prayer to God and asked him that somebody there would be welcoming and befriend her, and she did not get a good reception. So I encourage her, give it a second try.
I know of circumstance where people started at a congregation at the invitation of someone, and then when two other parties are over here, they're saying, "Who's that?" They said, "Oh, that's some of John's people." I mean, because John invited them, we ignore them?
They're not John's people.
That's right. That's right. And so if you see a guest that you don't know, it doesn't matter who brought them. They may have walked in off the street. We've had that happen too. Go meet them and make them welcome. All of this is a part of not just sowing the seed, preparing the soil. We can help one another. And sometimes you have to introduce people. In our situation, it's tough because we don't have a lot of other teens to you to introduce them to. But we got some folks that are kind of, lightheaded, young in the brain, not very smart. Introduce them to crazy people, they'll get along.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, introduce them to Junie. But again, the parable of the sower is really about the sowing. And we just keep sowing. We just keep sowing. And I know it can get discouraging. It can be challenging. But recognize, by telling what kind of soil there is, takes the blame, if you please, off of you. You sow the seed and they don't respond, okay. That's on them. You can sow the seed again. You can invite them again. Hey, really enjoyed having you with us. Come on, one of my friends was asking about you. come on back. Sowing the seed. Now, I think sowing the seed is more than just inviting people to church, but it's part of how we began the process. Not having miraculous powers and not being able to heal people and turn water to wine, we typically don't get immediate first-time responses. I've had one, to my knowledge, in my life. One of my elders was going to church. He got out in his car, and his neighbor was there, and he said, "Why don't you come to church with us?" And the guy said, "Believe I will." And he got in the car, and they drove to church. And he went to class in the service. We worshiped and sang, and I got up and preached, and it just so happened I'd chosen that day to preach on hell. This guy responded to the invitation, was baptized. First time at church. Rare does that happen in this day and age, but doesn't mean we can't offer the message again. Any other comments, questions, remarks? All right, next week, January the 3rd or the 10th, we're going to be talking about the seed, the mustard seed, and the yeast, and the scripture references are given there. If you will read up on that, have some comments to make, and you should have page 2, which asks you to discuss the lessons and applications that can be made from this parable.